Somerset is a curious place. Not for lack of interest, I am just rarely there. It was actually one of the biggest gaps in our footage that we had to hurriedly plug this summer. It's suitably absent of major roads to get easily from here in East Dorset up there, and it's scarcely on the way to anywhere else. It's not to speak ill of the place, its attraction is self-evident, but we caught most of this coverage on two occasions. The first, I was actually playing at a festival just outside Shepton Mallet, so in the afternoons I could sneak off site and get around some Hillforts. The other was an all-day road trip this summer just gone, starting before 5 in the morning and driving near solidly till 6 in the evening, but it was a great day for it. Well, beginning in the north and within the city of Bristol, we are just on the other side of the Clifton Suspension Bridge. There are actually a series of hillforts here, seemingly about 3 on either side of the gorge, but Stokely Camp is the most visible. We're fortunate that this bit is free of trees, so you can see the ramparts on the western side. Now, while the Avon Gorge provides defences to the east, I've not found out whether or not the rate of erosion would have removed some of the site on that side. The one possible entrance identified is on the north, which is now where the footpath runs, pretty close to the edge of the gorge slope. The ramparts do survive at an impressive height. Excavations between 1966 and 71 found Iron Age and Roman debris. It also might have had some occupation in the Middle Ages. In the late Iron Age, this area would be the territory of the DOLEBURY, but just a reminder, at this point in the series, we've covered quite a lot of these concepts in depth, and the names that come down to us for these tribal groupings are from the late Iron Age, and they're just not that helpful for us in understanding the early Iron Age, which is 500 or 600 years earlier, when a lot of the hill forts were taking shape. So circling just to the south of the suburbs of Bristol, Maze Knoll. It does cover a pretty vast area, just over 10 hectares in sort of a rough triangle. This bank on the west cuts off your only access from that side, and this is known as the Tump. It's pretty high. It's 7.6 metres above the interior, but up to 15 metres below the depth of the ditch, and it's definitely one of the most striking features of the site. There was a suggestion that this was a terminus of the Wansdyke. We just haven't got the scope to cover Wansdyke in this series. It's probably not from our era of interest anyway, but yeah, it's a story for another day. A little way to the west, Cadbury Camp is pretty much just here to mess with our filing system, as this, famously, isn't the only Cadbury-based hill fort in the county. It's a pretty large bivalate enclosure with impressive views down to the Somerset levels to the south. The only entrance believed to be original is the one to the north, with a pretty impressive inturned hornwork surviving. As well as Neolithic and Bronze Age finds, there appears to have been considerable Roman activity on the site, with quite a number of coin finds, the latest being Valentinian II, so about 375 to 387 AD. Well, moving on, and apologies if some of the summaries seem a little brief this episode. I don't know if anyone's noticed our usual once every 10 days schedule starting to slip, but as I said before, these are a lot of work to make. About 20 to 30 hours is about the average from writing the script and sourcing everything to the final bounce and upload. And this is at a time when not only has some nebulous force inexplicably cut almost every YouTube's channel views approximately in half. I mean, when it comes to the field of archaeology and AI poisoning the well, that seems to be generous. I mean, first of all, it would be boiling the well to power a data center, but really the central pillar of this channel was always, if we're going to talk about a place, we want to have actually been there, not just talk about it offhand over some stock footage looping over and over, or in the case of AI, just confidently lying with some statistically plausible sentences. Actually go there and show it to you. And I can't think of any greater antidote to the cynical flooding of the zone with not just drivel, like lies, actual lies that we're probably going to have to spend decades unpicking to the general public. So please do the YouTube things that support us. You know what these are by now. One of the reasons this episode is running a pinch late, and I was very excited about this, we did a guest episode for Alex Iles. He's a friend of the channel, and it was really nice to stretch our legs and do an episode on something completely different than our recent Hillfort spree. You can find that in the top right or in the description, and do drop Alex a follow while you're there. He's also doing some excellent source-based history over there. In fact, much as I don't like this, smashing that bell has become a real necessity for smaller channels like ours. This platform is not even showing our stuff to our followers. Like about 1,000 people have hit subscribe in the last year, yet our views stall out at 4, maybe 500 views. I can't see how that makes sense, except when the platform is kneecapping our stuff right out of the gate. So please do hit the bell and the like button, and hey, we might actually be able to get this out to people. Okay, so we're at Cadbury, and as we're enjoying the views down to the south, I feel like Somerset itself might need a bit of explaining, as it's far from a normal territory. You know what, we have to do this somewhere. Title drop. So one of the single biggest considerations when looking at Somerset is that its appearance on maps today is something of a modern invention. In the deep past, a large part of the landscape was semi, or fully, submerged. It has this in common with parts of East Anglia, kind of between Lincolnshire and Cambridgeshire. Before extensive land reclamation through the medieval period and then into early modern times, Britain would have looked more like this. And it's been a while now, but if you think back to certain winters, I think 2013 was pretty bad if I recall. It seems like Poseidon sometimes comes back to reclaim what's rightfully his. If you saw at the time news footage just showing miles upon miles of just flooded land. Now all of this might sound completely antithetical to human habitation and thriving. And sure, famously, for example, when King Alfred was badly defeated in battle, he fled to Athelney precisely because of how much of a pain it would have been to follow or even find him in there. Excavations have revealed some Bronze Age activity here. Must say the only thing really visible now is the Victorian monument, but yes, even a gentle rise like this would have made all the difference when the water table was lapping just a couple of metres below. But even though we have to go back to the Neolithic for a moment, don't forget that wetlands are a real abundant source of food. This is your periodic reminder that prehistoric folks generally do not want to live in the woods. It's actually terrible for hunting. You have to roll critical to really hit anything, and you'll probably just starve. In fact, axes became such a pivotal, central icon of their culture precisely because it meant you could clear land for agriculture and other things. But being on the edge of a wetland, however, you've got birds, fish, eels, snails, trade links, canoes, and trackways. This, by the way, is one of my favourite pieces of recreated archaeology. This is a section of the Sweetway track. You can see some of the original pieces in the Somerset Museum. This was excavated in what were formerly the marshes to the west of Glastonbury. Now, granted, this is a Neolithic project, but hence, with a few thousand years more time and improved tools, you can see that life here in this submerged landscape is absolutely possible. And of course, we have examples of this from elsewhere too. Where humans inhabited wetlands, they didn't just scrape by, they had a proper crack at putting technology in place to manage the landscape. Yes, put a pin in a discussion of flag fen and in fact just pile-dwelling settlements in general for some completely different time. What this does mean is that any points in the landscape that are a little higher are going to be particularly significant and celebrated. In fact, you may recall that coming back this way, we are bumping into the Durotriges. Cadbury and Ham Hill are two incredibly significant hill forts that today sit just outside Dorset and in South Somerset. We've already covered those, so perhaps circle back to the first episodes in the series for more of those. But based on coin finds, we believe that right in the last decades before the arrival of the Romans, the Durotriges may have established an area of control roughly between the Brue and Parrett rivers, which corresponds to a narrow corridor approximately to Glastonbury Tor down to this place. This is Borough Mump. You can see from the unusual form, it's sort of reminiscent of Glastonbury Tor, just smaller, and added to the fact that these would have risen above an otherwise pretty watery landscape. Hill forts, these are not. So back to Glastonbury, it has some lynchets on the side, and I'm hoping I don't have to tell you that this church tower is not of considerable antiquity. I was somewhat surprised looking further into it that archaeology on the Tor, it's a pretty quiet picture, all things considered. Certainly compared to its status in the modern imagination as a place of ancient wonders the modern mind would struggle to comprehend. There's some Neolithic fragments and a few early medieval bits. Nothing that really relates to our period of interest here, anyway. However, if you aim west, you get to a site that provides something of a linchpin in the landscape. Now, Brent Knoll is an impressively high beacon in an otherwise flat area. It's actually an interesting example of denudation. This is where the waters eroded the ground, leaving this chunk of Jurassic blue lias rock exposed above the land around. You certainly see it for a long way off as you approach on the M5 to the south. The fort is a roughly triangular enclosure. At first glance, it appears univalate, but you can just see some of the multivalation at the northern entrance. The ditches are an impressive height still. The interior has been somewhat disturbed by quarrying. These might be spoil heaps, I'm not actually sure. There were some antiquarian excavations in the 1800s. They brought up Iron Age, but also Roman material, including coins and some Samian fragments. From here, you have an incredible panorama in all directions. The haze was kind of blunting the views on the day I was there, but other than the Bristol Channel and South Wales off in the distance, you can see the estuary of the River Parrett to the south, and that's the slice of land that the Durotriges would come to control. To the north, you have a ridgeline, and just visible is DOLEBURY Warren, where we're going to be in a bit. But first, heading to the coast, you can see how, similarly, these rocky ridges have remained high above the Channel coast, while the land below was gradually washed flat. Now, I didn't make it to the southernmost of these three. This is Brean Down. Sand Point to the north we'll reach in a moment, but first, Weston super-Mare is, of course, a rather kitsch seaside resort. On the day I was there, it was rather hot and hazy at this point. However, above the town on a steep hill now covered with trees, this is Worlebury Hillfort. More significantly, you can see that this is not just an ordinary promontory fort hidden under some trees. These are stone ramparts. You can see that there are multiple layers here that took some serious effort to put together. And sure enough, there's evidence of significant occupation at the site with a large number of storage pits and hut platforms. There were a number of excavations done in the 1800s, and the discovery of skeletons with trauma, along with burn layers at the fort, were interpreted as a violent assault on the site. But as we've seen in this series, archaeologists in the 20th century may have been a little too hasty to bring in a narrative of conflict and destruction to join together features that have later turned out to be no such thing. So referring to the work at Maiden Castle, a lot of Mortimer Wheeler's burn layers almost certainly just came from ironwork and workshops in the fort. Skeletons with trauma turned out to be from a much wider time range than his proposed massacre. And sure enough, a reappraisal by Mark Bowden in 2019 suggests, quote, "There is no reason to assume that the human remains are anything other than normal Iron Age burials, which may have been deposited at any time during the life of the site. The wounds on many of the skeletons are certainly evidence of violence, but this does not mean the violence was inflicted at the hill fort or as the result of a single episode." Now, I was having a little bit of bad luck on this day, but not quite as much bad luck as the guys who tried to get their 4x4 plus trailer through the eastern gate and appeared to have grounded themselves. I did offer to help, but as suspected, even between the three of us, not much I could have helpfully contributed. This did, however, mean that all my aerial footage of these lovely ramparts had this in the centre. I mean, it does help give scale, I suppose, but there we go. There was believed to be a gateway to the south as well. You can see some of the scattered stone of the ramparts there, but the trees and the disruption of the site are confusing the picture somewhat. But within clear line of sight to the north, Sand Point Promontory Fort is certainly not short of spectacular views. Not only across the Bristol Channel, I've got some nice shots of the water on this day, but also across this shallow bay on the southern side. The ramparts themselves are harder to spot. I realised the problem I was having on the day spotting this was because what I thought was a promontory rampart is in fact a later Norman motte. This is somewhat reminding me of Binknell Castle, which we looked at last week. So there's that. The nearby trig point is sitting on top of a Bronze Age barrow. The records on this one are a little confusing. Minimal archaeology done there. I assumed that this was the rampart, but I could be wrong on that. It's all a bit slight here anyway. I think some of the bumps to the east are actually part of a field system. So if we head inland, and this is a major one. This is DOLEBURY Warren. I really wanted to get a second visit to see these before the episodes went out, but I just ended up not having enough time, which is a shame because this is an incredibly significant and large site that, like Worlebury, has some stone ramparts encircling much of its considerable area, yet I rarely hear this talked about in the discussions of Britain's great forts. At 22 hectares in area, it greatly outstrips the 12 acres of Yavering Bell up in Northumberland, also with its stone ramparts and oval form. This has a rather good paper by James Bowden as well. The western entrance is original, but the gaps in the ramparts to the east are more recent interruptions. There's been quite a lot of question about the stone that makes up the ramparts to the northern side. For starters, this does not make it all the way round. The southern side is univalate, but the circuit becomes bivalate to the north. But yeah, the connections or similarities to Worlebury have not gone unnoticed, but perhaps unsurprisingly, because of the state the walls are in now, there's a lot less we can be certain of regarding their original state. The interior is actually another story entirely. A mixture of medieval ploughing, modern pasture, some small mining. All of this has actually left the interior lower than the land on the other side of the ramparts. The name DOLEBURY Warren is actually after a medieval rabbit warren here, bred for food, and much of the interior has been altered by this. Otherwise, as the paper notes, there's a lot of unanswered questions of the site. Dating is far from certain. The suggestion of an early to mid Iron Age establishment followed by a late Iron Age abandonment is only by comparison with similar sites in southern Britain. There are Roman finds there, but not enough to characterise the nature of Romano-British activity on the site. So yeah, a lot more that we'd like to know. An aside here, I don't know why exactly, but parking for DOLEBURY is an absolute mare. There's this nice little residential area at its base, but the roads by the houses are so narrow, there's really no way to park without causing a massive block in the road. So I ended up circling in the car for around 45 minutes in the near area, just trying to find an even half decent spot to pull over. There's a bunch of small lanes around the hill, and each of them has signs like no, nope, absolutely not, go away, scram, git. Clearly, there's people trying to access the Hillfort for walks and all, but whatever's happening with the locals and footpaths, it's all just a mess. I ended up having to join a conga line of cars that had parked near a local pub that was far more popular than the handful of its sanctioned parking spaces would suggest, and walking a not inconsiderable distance. DOLEBURY is managed by National Trust. I might have missed something, but guys, find some way to put up a few signs and parking spaces for everyone's sake. So all of that took up a lot of time, and I actually had to be back at the Commission Festival for a sound check at 4, so it rather ate into my time to actually explore the site, which is annoying because it's way more impressive than I'd realised, and I would have liked to have had more chance to explore it. Still, here it is. Following along the same ridge, you reach Burrington Camp. All of this is on a carboniferous limestone ridge at the edge of the Mendip Hills, but I'm just not over fond of writing geology checks that I can't cache, which is why this series is a bit light on the rocks underlying the landscape. I don't want to be seen as trying to be smarter than I am by just parroting some geology terms that I really can't unpack in any depth. This is a square enclosure just on the edge of a cliff. You can't see it quite as well, but the ramparts are most prominently in an L shape to the east and south sides. Excavation in 1960 revealed that this may have been unfinished. No evidence of occupation was found in the interior. Just full disclosure, I was having some trouble flying on this day. Devices were being very snippy about connecting for whatever reason. So I got the shots just about, not the greatest view, but also with all my time taken up with trying to access DOLEBURY, I just had to leave it at that. So next along, Maysbury. You can see this is a pretty nicely formed enclosure. It's just north of Shepton Mallet. There's been minimal investigation, though apparently quite a lot of plough damage, and the gates are not quite in their original form either, though the ramparts have for the most part survived pretty well. It doesn't appear to be any easy access. The gate that would lead you up to it has that oh-so-friendly barbed wire, and there doesn't appear to be a proper route through the local fields. I know this because I nearly lost my Mavic Mini doing this. The blue skies probably don't betray just how windy it was that day. I wasn't even flying that high. Just when I tried to turn the device back towards home, it wasn't getting any closer. In fact, you could just see that stomach-turning moment when the distance number keeps going up on the controller, even though you're not controlling it. I've only ever had that a couple of times. Then I lost connection entirely, so somewhat bricking it. I jumped some barbed wire fences and scampered across the field to just try and close the gap to reconnect, and thankfully somehow managed to get back in touch and bring it down safely and retrieve it. That was not an experience I'd like to repeat. Well, on for the next, we have to actually go a fair distance south, and Castle Nirosh is an unusual one. For context, I caught this on a weekend I was running for a number of pianists at this old mill Airbnb, which was simultaneously lovely and also had a large number of dead flies in it. And, well, anyway, we spent a rather grey afternoon in October exploring here. It's another that was an Iron Age fort that was later transformed by the Normans. The info board art is particularly instrumental here, mainly because the site is pretty tree covered, and so an overall look at what's going on is elusive. We do have this rather wonderful plan of the site from 1911. The 1903 excavations found medieval material, but nothing from the Iron Age. The ditches are considerable, and when you get to the north of the site, the land suddenly drops off very rapidly. So yeah, I got some nice moody coverage of this, and it was a fun one to discover in the woods, but yes, not a lot we can say about a possible Iron Age foundation, as Norman work is dominating the site. And a last one, bit of a miscellaneous one, actually. It's just outside of Taunton. It was a day I was at the Somerset Museum, which has some pretty remarkable stuff. I wish I'd been able to catch this before I made my Durotriges episodes, but it's just not an inconsiderable distance away, and I couldn't get there in time. Well, in a rather pleasant village in the outskirts of Taunton is Norton Fitzwarren. Other than a little bit of signage, there's not a lot to let you know this isn't just a local common where you can walk dogs, but from above you can see this is actually a remarkably large enclosure situated on a gentle rise. You can see the Quantock Hills off at the horizon. Something I didn't have time to explore, but there's 3 deep sunken lanes that converge on the site here, here and here. The site's had use for thousands of years, with excavations from 1968 to 71 picking up flints from as far back as the Mesolithic and finds all the way through the Neolithic and Bronze Age, seemingly the site being reinforced with a univallate fort in the Iron Age. Well, afraid it's a bit more brief this week. I don't know if you can hear, I think I'm getting ill, so I don't know how these voice takes are going to be, but hopefully it's all right. But please consider supporting our channel. One of the things that would be doing us a massive favour is if you just scroll back a little bit. All the YouTube things like liking and subscribing are great, but to be honest, it always just is the biggest rush when people are actually watching our stuff, and it's so disappointing to see things that you've put so many hours into just not being seen by anyone, just kind of languishing there in obscurity. So yeah, if you could do that, failing that, a like or a smashing of the bell does give us a much needed boost. Otherwise, you can always check in on what we're doing on Blue Sky. That doesn't suffer the same backlog that we have making things into episodes. And you can also help us out much more directly by going to Bandcamp. That's where you can catch all the music you've been hearing in the background, and a purchase there would go a long way to support us, though it's also just nice to have folks streaming our music there, which you can do for free. Otherwise, we'll be back with more Hillforts next time. We'll see you soon.